Private First Class Eugene Sledge, 21 years old, crouched in the cramped troop compartment of landing craft vehicle personnel 4 to 12, trying to keep his breakfast down as the small vessel pitched through the morning swells. Through gaps in the bow ramp, he could see the green terraced hills of Okinawa rising from beaches that looked deceptively peaceful in the dawn light. The smell of diesel exhaust mixed with salt spray and fierce sweat from 36 Marines packed into a space designed for 30. Around him, the largest amphibious invasion in Pacific War history was unfolding with industrial precision. 1,300 ships, 183,000 American troops from the 10th Army, 60 miles from mainland Japan. The Imperial Japanese homeland was close enough that on clear nights, you could see the glow of cities on the horizon. What Sledge and the thousands of Marines from the 1st Marine Division and soldiers from the 7th Infantry Division didn't know, what none of them crowding into those landing craft could have imagined, was that they were sailing into 82 days of methodical slaughter. The bloodiest battle of the Pacific War. A campaign that would produce more American casualties than the atomic bombs killed Japanese. A fight so savage, so unrelenting, that it would convince President Truman that invading Japan itself would cost 1 million American lives. The Japanese had been preparing for this moment since October 10, 1944, when American carrier aircraft had devastated Okinawa's airfields in preliminary strikes. Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima, 58 years old, commanding the 32nd Army, had studied every American amphibious operation since Tarawa, Saipan, Peleliu, Iwo Jima. He understood the American pattern with mathematical clarity. Massive naval bombardment, frontal beach assault, rapid advance inland capitalizing on firepower and mobility. The Americans expected Japanese forces to defend the beaches, to die in futile banzai charges, to exhaust themselves in weeks of attrition. They expected another bloody but relatively quick island campaign. Ushijima, working with his brilliant chief of staff, Colonel Hiromichi Ahara, a staff college intellectual who understood modern warfare's brutal mathematics, decided to rewrite the script entirely. Let them land unopposed. Let them establish their beachhead without resistance. Let them advance north through the narrow Ishikawa Isthmus against token opposition. And when they turned south toward the real Japanese positions, when they were committed and confident, bleed them white in a war of attrition so costly that America would negotiate peace rather than face the carnage of invading the home islands. The mathematics of desperation were already calculated in the limestone ridges of southern Okinawa. 77,000 Japanese soldiers from the 24th Division, 62nd Division, and 44th Independent Mixed Brigade. 20,000 Okinawan conscripts from the Beitaitai Home Guard, some as young as 14. 1,500 artillery pieces ranging from 47mm anti-tank guns to massive 320mm spigot mortars. 30 miles of interconnected fortifications carved into ancient coral limestone using mining techniques that created underground cities. Every cave entrance, every Okinawan family tomb, every ravine and reverse slope transformed into mutually supporting killing zones. This wouldn't be Tarawa, overrun in 76 hours. This wouldn't be Iwo Jima, secured in 36 days. This would be Verdun transplanted to the Pacific, a grinding war of attrition where terrain mattered more than tactics and determination outlasted firepower. Among the 183,000 Americans approaching the Hagushi beaches that Easter Sunday morning were men who had earned 7 medals of honor, 33 who would never see their 20th birthday for everyone who survived, and thousands whose names would be carved on memorials they would never see. But on April 1st, 1945, they were just cold, scared kids who had been told this would be the last island before Japan, the final test before the war ended. The first assault waves from the 1st and 6th Marine Divisions hit the Hagushi beaches at exactly 8:30 a.m. under cloudless skies. Amtraks ground up the coral sand and kept moving inland. Marines tensed, weapons ready, waiting for the devastating defensive fire that had turned other beaches into slaughterhouses. Nothing. They crossed 400 yards of beach without a single shot. advanced through coastal villages abandoned except for terrified civilians, secured their initial objectives by 9:45 a.m. with only scattered sniper fire. By nightfall, 60,000 American troops were ashore with casualties so light, 28 killed, 104 wounded, that some units thought the Japanese had evacuated the island. At Kadena Airfield, captured intact by 10:30 a.m., bewildered Marines walked around operational Japanese aircraft abandoned on the runway. At Yantan Airfield, seized by noon, American engineers were already repairing runways before Japanese demolition charges could be triggered. The regimental commanders radioed back to their division headquarters with confusion barely concealed in their voices. Minimal resistance. Objective secured. Awaiting orders. 60 miles south, deep in the Shuri Castle complex buried under 30 feet of limestone and reinforced concrete, Colonel Yahara watched situation reports arrive by runner and field telephone. He permitted himself a thin smile. The trap was being set perfectly. Let them celebrate, he told his operations staff. Let them think we're beaten. When they turn south and face the Machinato Line, the Kakaza Ridge, the Shuri Heights, they'll understand. We're not fighting for this island. We're fighting for time. Every day we hold delays their invasion of Japan. Every American casualty makes their politicians question whether victory is worth the price. This story is about how terrain became a weapon, how defense defeated offense despite overwhelming firepower, and how both sides discovered that modern industrial warfare could create killing fields where courage and technology meant nothing against limestone ridges that absorb artillery like water and defenders who viewed death not as failure, but as duty. The pleasant fiction of easy victory lasted exactly 9 days. On April 4th, elements of the 96th Infantry Division advancing south through the narrow Ishikawa Isthmus encountered the first real Japanese positions at Cactus Ridge. The terrain changed abruptly from gentle hills to jagged coral escarpments rising 200 to 400 feet at near vertical angles. Every ridge was honeycombed with caves. Every cave mouth concealed artillery, mortars, and machine guns positioned with interlocking fields of fire calculated to the yard. When the 381st Infantry Regiment attempted a frontal assault at 2:15 p.m., they discovered what would become horrifyingly familiar. Japanese defenders were invisible until Americans reached killing zones marked by white stones that artillery spotters used as range markers. Then the ridges erupted. 320 mm spigot mortars, massive shells launched from buried tubes, fell with freight train howls, each explosion creating craters 30 feet wide. 150 mm howitzers firing from caves that had been surveyed for indirect fire turned approach routes into killing zones. 47 mm anti-tank guns, worthless against American armor on open ground, became precision sniper rifles firing from cave mouths that appeared and disappeared behind camouflage nets. The 381st Infantry took 326 casualties in 6 hours and advanced 100 yards. When they withdrew at dusk, Japanese infiltration teams emerged from spider holes and caves to reoccupy lost positions, reset booby traps, and recover American weapons and ammunition. Major General James Bradley, commanding the 96th Infantry Division, sent a priority message to Lieutenant General Simon Bolivar Buckner, Jr., 10th Army Commander, at 9:30 p.m. Enemy resistance intensifying. Terrain favors defense. Heavy casualties anticipated. He had no idea how prophetic those words were. By April 9th, the American advance had stalled completely along a defensive line the Japanese call the Machinato Line and Americans would call Kakaza Ridge, Tombstone Ridge, and a dozen other names dripping with blood. The 96th Infantry Division, the 7th Infantry Division, and elements of the 27th Infantry Division were grinding forward at costs that made Iwo Jima look merciful. The terrain was unlike anything American forces had encountered. Okinawa's southern region was ancient coral limestone thrust up by volcanic action, then carved by millennia of rain into a nightmare landscape of ridges, ravines, and escarpments. The Japanese had spent 5 months fortifying this terrain using techniques borrowed from German mountain warfare manuals and their own experience in China. Forward positions were sacrificial. Small fighting holes occupied by 2 or 3 men intended to identify American assembly areas and disrupt attacks. The real positions were on reverse slopes, invisible to American observers, and immune to naval gunfire that arced over ridges to explode harmlessly behind Japanese lines. Artillery positions were in deep caves with multiple entrances, allowing crews to fire a few rounds, then withdraw before American counter-battery fire arrived. Infantry positions were connected by tunnels that allowed defenders to reinforce threatened sectors or evacuate before being overrun, then reoccupy positions from hidden tunnels after Americans passed. Even the burial tombs of Okinawan families, massive concrete and stone structures built into hillsides, have been converted into fortified strong points with firing ports and ammunition storage. The result was a defender's paradise and an attacker's nightmare. American tactics developed through 3 years of island warfare were suddenly obsolete. At 6 a.m. on April 19th, the 27th Infantry Division launched what was intended to be the breakthrough assault on Kamikaze Ridge. The attack had been planned with everything the American military could bring to bear. Naval gunfire from 6 battleships and 8 cruisers. Artillery support from 324 guns, ranging from 105mm howitzers to massive 8-inch guns. Air support from 650 sorties by Marine and Navy aircraft dropping napalm, bombs, and rockets. The 105th Infantry Regiment, 3,200 men, would assault Kamikaze Ridge frontally while the 106th Infantry Regiment attacked Kamikaze West. 30 M, 4 Sherman tanks, and 27 flame tanks would provide armored support. It was overwhelming force applied with industrial efficiency. The attack began at 6:40 a.m. with the most intense bombardment yet delivered on Okinawa. For 30 minutes, explosives rained on Kamikaze Ridge at a rate of 100 tons per minute. The noise was physically painful. Coral dust rose in clouds that obscured the sun. Observers watching from command posts 3 miles away couldn't see the ridge through the smoke and debris. At 7:10 a.m., the barrage lifted and the 105th Infantry advanced behind a rolling barrage, tanks grinding forward through the debris, flamethrowers ready to burn out any surviving Japanese. What happened next shocked every American observer. As the first wave reached the base of Kamikaze Ridge, the apparently devastated positions erupted with fire. Machine guns from positions that should have been obliterated opened up with overlapping fields of fire. Mortars from reverse slope positions began dropping rounds with pre-registered accuracy. Artillery from caves miles behind the front line started falling with timing that suggested forward observers had survived the bombardment and were calmly directing fire. The Sherman tanks, effective on flat terrain, became helpless targets on the steep coral slopes. Their 75mm guns couldn't elevate high enough to hit cave mouths above them. Their armor, proof against Japanese anti-tank guns on open ground, was vulnerable to 47mm guns firing down at thin top armor. Their tracks couldn't grip the shattered coral, leaving them immobile targets. Within 20 minutes, 8 tanks were burning. Their crews who escaped became casualties to small arms fire before reaching cover. The flamethrower tanks, approaching to burn out cave positions, were destroyed by magnetic mines thrown from above or by suicide attackers who climbed aboard and dropped grenades through hatches. Staff Sergeant Buford Anderson of Company A, 105th Infantry, found himself leading 12 men up a narrow ravine that was supposed to be clear. A Japanese machine gun opened fire from a cave mouth 40 feet above, killing 4 men in the first burst. Anderson charged the position with grenades and a Thompson submachine gun, somehow reaching the cave entrance and killing the crew. He held the position alone for 12 hours against multiple counterattacks, was wounded 3 times, and refused evacuation until relieved that evening. He would receive the Medal of Honor, one of 7 awarded on Okinawa. By noon, the 105th Infantry had taken 50% casualties and gained 150 yards. The 106th Infantry, attacking Kamikaze West, was pinned down with 40% casualties and no gain. At 2 p.m., Major General George Greiner, commanding the 27th Infantry Division, ordered withdrawal to original positions. The breakthrough attack had failed completely. 720 Americans were casualties. 30 tanks destroyed. Ground gained, 0. That night, Japanese infiltration teams reoccupied every position Americans had briefly held, reset booby traps, and recovered American weapons. By dawn on April 20th, the battlefield looked exactly as it had on April 18th, except for the American dead still lying in the ravines. Lieutenant General Buckner, 10th Army commander, read the casualty reports at his command post and made a decision that would define the rest of the campaign. There would be no more dramatic breakthroughs, no more attempts at rapid maneuver. This would be systematic reduction, cave by cave, ridge by ridge, using every weapon in the American arsenal applied with industrial persistence until Japanese resistance was literally buried. What followed was World War II's ugliest campaign, where the Americans discovered their doctrinal advantages. Mobility, firepower, air superiority meant nothing against an enemy who wouldn't maneuver, who stayed underground during bombardments, and who had chosen terrain where tanks and aircraft were nearly useless. The fighting devolved into a pattern that would repeat with nightmarish consistency for the next 70 days. Dawn would bring American artillery barges, followed by infantry assaults supported by tanks and flamethrowers. Japanese defenders would allow Americans to advance into killing zones, then open fire from positions that appeared and disappeared like ghosts. Afternoon would bring desperate close-quarters fighting with grenades, satchel charges, and flamethrowers as Americans tried to reduce individual positions. Evening would bring Japanese counterattacks and infiltration as defenders tried to reoccupy lost positions. The Americans advanced by yards measured in bodies. Private First Class Desmond Doss, a seventh-day Adventist combat medic with the 307th Infantry Regiment, 77th Infantry Division, refused to carry a weapon on religious grounds. On May 5th, during the assault on the Maeda Escarpment, a 400-foot cliff faced the Americans called Haxar Ridge. Doss's company was pinned down at the top by Japanese fire from caves and bunkers. When the order came to withdraw at 5:30 p.m., Doss remained behind to treat the wounded. 4 or 5 hours, under constant fire, he lowered 75 wounded men one at a time down the cliff face using a rope sling, praying, "Dear God, let me get just one more after each rescue." He would receive the Medal of Honor, the only conscientious objector so recognized in World War II. His story illustrated the savage intimacy of the fighting. Soldiers were dying within yards of safety because the terrain and Japanese fire made evacuation nearly impossible. By early May, both sides were exhausted, but neither would break. The Americans had learned to fight the Japanese way, using flamethrowers and satchel charges to reduce positions individually, using tanks as mobile bunkers rather than assault weapons, accepting that gains would be measured in yards and each yard would cost blood. The Japanese, following Ushijima's strategy, were trading space for time and American casualties. Every day of American delay was another day for Japan to prepare for invasion. Every American casualty was another family grieving, another voter questioning whether unconditional surrender was worth the price. The human cost was staggering and accelerating. On May 11th, Buckner ordered a general offensive along the entire front. 6 divisions, the 1st Marine Division, 6th Marine Division, 77th Infantry Division, 96th Infantry Division, 7th Infantry Division, and 27th Infantry Division, would attack simultaneously to break the Shuri Line once and for all. What followed was the most intense fighting of the Pacific War. For 2 weeks, from May 11th through May 24th, American forces attacked positions that had names like Sugar Loaf Hill, the Horseshoe, Half Moon Hill, Wana Ridge, and Conical Hill. Each position was mutually supporting. Each could only be taken by frontal assault. Each cost hundreds of lives. Sugar Loaf Hill, an unprepossessing coral mound 300 yards long and 150 feet high on the outskirts of Naha, became a killing ground that rivaled anything from World War I. The 6th Marine Division assaulted it 11 times between May 12th and May 18th. Each assault reached the crest. Each was driven back by counterattacks from connected positions on Half Moon Hill and the Horseshoe. On May 14th, Company G, 22nd Marines attacked Sugar Loaf at 8:30 a.m. with 180 men. By 2 p.m., only 45 were still standing. The survivors withdrew carrying their wounded, and the Japanese reoccupied the position by nightfall. This pattern repeated daily, like a macabre ritual where the same ground changed hands multiple times, and each exchange cost dozens of lives. Marine Corps Captain Howard Mabee, commanding Company I, 29th Marines, led 7 separate assaults on Sugar Loaf Hill. His company began the battle with 240 men. By May 16th, he had 47 effectives remaining. When asked by a reporter how he felt, Mabee replied, "We're not fighting for real estate. We're fighting to kill every Japanese on this island so we can invade Japan without them. Every day we're here, the war goes on. Every man we lose here might save 10 on the beaches of Kyushu. You do the math." The math was brutal. The 6th Marine Division suffered 2,662 casualties, taking Sugar Loaf Hill, Half Moon Hill, and Horseshoe. Ground gained, 1,200 yards. Time, 7 days. By late May, the spring rains had begun, transforming Okinawa into a nightmare landscape of mud, decomposing bodies, and waterlogged positions. The rain fell continuously, sometimes 10 inches in 24 hours, turning valleys into swamps and foxholes into graves where men drowned in their sleep. Equipment rusted. Wounds became infected. Supply became a desperate struggle to move ammunition, food, and water forward through mud that swallowed trucks and made every step exhausting. The psychological toll was as devastating as the physical casualties. Combat fatigue, what today would be called PTSD, was removing men from the line as quickly as Japanese bullets. By late May, psychiatric casualties exceeded 2,000 men. Some simply stopped functioning, staring blankly at nothing. Others broke completely, screaming or weeping uncontrollably. The 96th Infantry Division reported that 60% of their casualties in May were from combat fatigue. Eugene Sledge, the young Marine private who had landed on April 1st expecting another tough island fight, wrote in his diary on May 23rd, "We're no longer Marines. We're filthy, exhausted animals living in mud and dying for yards of coral rock. I've been scared before. I've been exhausted before, but I've never felt this complete despair. There's no end. We take a hill, and there's another. We kill 100 Japanese, and another 100 are waiting. I understand now why men just walk away into enemy fire. It's not courage failing. It's just done, finished, unable to continue." But the Americans did continue with the grim determination that characterized their approach to everything in World War II. If tactics didn't work, apply more firepower. If firepower didn't work, apply industrial quantities of firepower. If men broke, bring up fresh units. The industrial advantage that had built 15,000 P-47 Thunderbolts was now applied to infantry combat. By late May, the Shuri defensive line was beginning to crack, not through dramatic breakthrough, but through systematic destruction. The Americans had learned to neutralize cave positions by sealing them with explosives or using flamethrowers and gasoline to burn out the oxygen. Entire ridges were leveled by concentrated artillery fire. The 96th Infantry Division alone fired 300,000 artillery rounds in May, more than the entire North African campaign. On May 22nd, reconnaissance patrols reported that Japanese resistance around Shuri Castle seemed lighter. Marines entering Shuri on May 29th found it abandoned except for delaying forces. Ushijima had made his decision: withdraw to the Kiin Peninsula, the southern tip of Okinawa, and continue the fight. The Americans celebrated what looked like a breakthrough. They controlled 2/3 of the island. Surely the worst was over. They were wrong. The final phase of the battle, the reduction of the Kiin Peninsula from June 1st through June 21st, was characterized by a savagery that shocked troops who thought they had seen everything. The Japanese, compressed into an area roughly 5 miles by 8 miles, fought with the desperation of men who knew they were dying but intended to take as many Americans as possible with them. The terrain made southern Okinawa look gentle. The Kiin Peninsula was a mass of coral ridges rising almost vertically from the sea, honeycombed with natural caves and augmented positions. Every approach was covered by interlocking fire. Every position required direct assault. There were no flanks, no maneuver options, nothing but frontal attack into prepared positions held by men who expected to die. On June 18th, Lieutenant General Buckner was observing the 8th Marines attack on a ridge complex near Misato when a Japanese 47mm shell detonated on the coral beside his observation post. Shrapnel from the shell and coral fragments struck Buckner in the chest. He died 10 minutes later, the highest-ranking American officer killed by enemy fire in World War II. Major General Roy Geiger, commanding 3 Marine Amphibious Corps, assumed command and continued the attack with the same methodical brutality. There would be no pause, no negotiation, nothing but complete annihilation of Japanese resistance. On June 21st, patrols from the 7th Infantry Division reached the southern tip of the Kiin Peninsula and reported no organized resistance. At 1:05 p.m., Marine Corps radio operators transmitted, "All organized resistance has ceased." The Battle of Okinawa was over after 82 days of continuous combat. The butcher's bill was almost incomprehensible. American losses: 12,520 killed or missing in action, 38,916 wounded, 26,211 combat fatigue casualties, 763 aircraft lost, 36 ships sunk, 368 ships damaged. Total casualties, 77,647, more than any other campaign in the Pacific War. Japanese losses, 77,166 soldiers confirmed killed, 10,755 captured or surrendered, an unprecedented ratio showing the shift in Japanese willingness to fight to the death. 42,000 to 150,000 Okinawan civilians dead, caught between the armies or killed in the crossfire, forced into Japanese service, or convinced by Japanese propaganda that Americans would murder them if they surrendered. The naval losses alone told the story of Japanese desperation. The kamikaze attacks launched in coordination with the land battle were the most intense of the war. 1,900 kamikaze sorties resulted in 36 American ships sunk and 368 damaged. 4,900 American sailors were killed, more than the Marine Corps losses on Iwo Jima. Every American casualty represented a calculation that was weighing on President Truman's mind. If Okinawa, an island 60 miles long, cost 12,520 American dead in 82 days, what would invading Japan cost? Pentagon planners were estimating 1 million American casualties for the invasion of Kyushu alone, scheduled for November 1945. The Japanese had 2,300,000 soldiers on the home islands, 28 million civilians trained in bamboo spear tactics, and had demonstrated on Okinawa that they would defend every yard with suicidal determination. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima on August 6th and Nagasaki on August 9th killed approximately 200,000 Japanese. Terrible numbers. But Pentagon planners estimated the invasion of Japan would kill 5 million to 10 million Japanese defending their homeland. The calculus was brutal but clear. Horrific immediate death versus exponentially greater death through invasion. In the limestone caves of southern Okinawa, Lieutenant General Ushijima and Colonel Yahara committed ritual suicide on June 22nd rather than be captured. Before dying, Ushijima sent a final message to Imperial headquarters. "Our strategy has succeeded. The Americans have learned what invading Japan will cost. They will hesitate. They will seek alternatives. We have bought time for the homeland." He was right. Okinawa's lessons directly influenced the decision to use atomic weapons rather than invade. The battle had demonstrated that Japanese forces, even when outnumbered and outgunned, could inflict casualties at ratios that made invasion politically untenable. For the American survivors, Okinawa represented something different. It was the end of the belief that American firepower and industrial capacity could make war quick or clean. It was the discovery that modern defensive warfare, when conducted by determined defenders in favorable terrain, could neutralize every technological advantage. Eugene Sledge, who survived the battle and would later write, with the Old Breed, one of the finest memoirs of the Pacific War, tried to explain what Okinawa meant. We believed we were fighting for civilization against barbarism. We believed our technology and industrial power made us superior. Okinawa taught us that none of that mattered when you try to take a cave from men who won't surrender. We learned that war isn't about tanks or planes or ships. It's about humans killing each other at close range, and the side that's willing to die for every yard will always make the cost unbearable. We won because we could replace losses and they couldn't. Not because we were braver or smarter or better. We just had more men willing to die for the next ridge. At the National Museum of the Pacific War in Fredericksburg, Texas, an exhibit on Okinawa features a piece of coral limestone from Sugar Loaf Hill. The rock is pockmarked with bullet holes and shrapnel scars. Next to it is a quote from an unnamed Marine, taken from a letter home written on June 5, 1945. "We've taken the island, but the island has taken us. Every man who survived is marked by what we saw here. We learned that the Japanese will fight to the death for their homeland. We learned that modern weapons can't make close combat less terrible. We learned that victory has a price, and sometimes that price is almost too high to pay. I'm alive. I'm grateful. But I'm not the same person who landed on April 1st. None of us are. The Battle of Okinawa stands as a grim monument to modern warfare's capacity for destruction. It demonstrated that industrial firepower couldn't negate terrain or determination. It showed that desperate defenders could inflict casualties far beyond their numbers. Most importantly, it convinced American leadership that invading Japan would require losses that democracy couldn't sustain. The battle's true significance is this. 82 days on a 60-mile island cost 12,520 American lives and convinced Truman that alternative means must be found to end the war. In that calculus, horrific as it was, lay the seeds of Japan's surrender without invasion and the end of World War II. The thunder had spoken on Okinawa, but unlike the P-47's guns over Europe, this thunder carried no satisfaction, no triumph. Only the grim recognition that modern war had become so terrible that any alternative, even atomic weapons, seemed merciful by comparison.